Hey, Dominic, how you doing? John, good to see you. What I thought would be a fun thing to talk about today is something that we used to talk about when I was doing a lot of things with computer people. We were always trying to figure out what the next best software or the next computer is going to be. And we relied a lot on computer magazines and so forth. And we we had these, trying to think how we did it. I think we had something like blogs back then. This is in the 90s, and there were blogs. I'm just trying to remember exactly how we did it, but we had very similar conversations like we have now. And so we were thinking, well, what are they going to do? What do you think they're going to do? And so forth. And a lot of the guys who were reporters for computer magazines would say, well, I interviewed so and so, and this is what they said. I talked to Steve Jobs, or I talked to Bill Gates, or I talked to somebody, and this is what they tell me that they're planning. And one of the most interesting, I think, and probably the greatest late 20th century sociologist was a guy named Irving Goffman. And Goffman, they asked him about the kind of research he was doing, and he said, well, I don't believe people very much anyway. And in interviews, I don't believe them at all. And what he meant by that is that what people are going to present and what they're going to talk about is what they want you to see. And so one of the people who was a little more sophisticated about reporters said, well, the difference between the way some Compute or one of those other magazines go about finding out about what's what in watches is they interview. They go up there and they say, okay, what's going on? And they'll talk to one person or the other. They'll talk to someone who works for them. And what they get is what they get. Now, on the other hand, someone said, well, the reporter for the Wall Street Journal, what they would do is they would go and they would talk to the suppliers and find out what the suppliers are working on. In other words, if there was a certain type of chip or something that they were working on, or they were working on some other kind of thing. In other words, they would go a little deeper. And I was thinking, here we can, every now and then we find some really good deals. The watches are good watches. The movements are good movements, or their in-house movements, or something that just have been overlooked. I think one brand that at least I overlooked for a long time was Schwartz ETN. Didn't think much about them. That name was sort of didn't ring any bells. But then as I found out about them, what I found out was sort of not by writing them and says, tell me about your watches, but rather by looking at how they did movements and who did the movements. Well, it turned out that they did. And so I was thinking, well, this would be a thing that we could figure out, is that these different kinds of things, like when Rolex dropped Buchner, that seemed, there's an opportunity to get a good deal on one of those on a Buchner watch. And so it's looking for different kinds of signals like that. When Butcher bought THA, I thought, oh boy, they're going to have a whole bunch of great stuff. But then I found out that people who belong to THA, even though I think they had good people all along, that the turnover was pretty high. It was sort of like a way station that people would go to do some creative stuff before they moved on to doing something else. And so it wasn't that V&E Halter and FP Jorn and oh, who's the other guy? The guy who founded De Bethune. Name his name. Anyway, they weren't still there. They were there for just sort of the startup. Anyhow, so I thought, so let's see if we can find some hidey holes or some signals to look at. If something happens here, then maybe something will happen here. For example, if we look at unpopular good brands and there's an unpopular model and they're going to drop the model, then there are opportunities. Just like when Urban Jurgensen was sold to Kari Voutilainen, suddenly there were some almost half-price watches available. And those of us who got our mitts on one got really great watches at virtually half of what they would cost otherwise. Okay, so let's see some ideas. Let's see who's here today. Arnold, Brian, good to see you. Tony, good to see you. Alberto. Oh, good. Sound and video going. Thank you very much. Hey, Fernie. Trap Vision, how you doing? Cam, or is it Cam or Can? Hang on a second. Let me just, there, a little bigger. Wired was interesting for the time. Yeah, John, that was one of the magazines. Wired, though, they were focused a little further out, I think. But yeah, they still, I guess, I don't know if they're still around, but there's chasing fads and find out what's the next fad is going to be. And I suppose we're on, what's the next extinct animal going to be that we can pick up for a good price? Sort of the opposite kind of thing. Hi, Eric. Junior. Hi, Junior. Whatever happened with Universal Geneive and Breitling acquisition? Why did anyone think two things? There was all of this stuff that Universal Geneive was going to be finally, someone was going to save them. Why did you think that? I mean, did they really have for years and years, they used somebody else's movement. They really never did anything that I knew about in movement development. Or if they did have their own movements, they didn't have a process for regularly manufacturing them. And so if somebody else comes along, let's face it, when Breitling bought Universal Geneive, what was it about Breitling that was, oh boy, Breitling bought them. They could hardly get their own movement. And doesn't the movement Breitling have, wasn't that co-developed with somebody else? They didn't do it on their own. I'm not sure. I'm not much of a Breitling fan, tell you the truth. Okay, that's enough of that. Brian, what happened? You had a nice big fat message there. Hey, Damon. VC pricing trends are down, and there are some good buys manifesting. Yeah, no, that's always a good idea. It's like sometimes the best deals are right in front of you. Without, all you got to do is just look at sort of the downtrends. If you can do that, and while the trend is still down, that would be a time to buy. Hey, Abdul. Okay, so what, one of the things that I like to look at, another thing you can see it, is Oh, Salida is building the B31 movement. How interesting. That is good news. I guess I wonder what that will mean though. Now they're building it, they're like they contracted with Breitling to build the B31, something like that. Breitling only. Okay. Hey Mark, how you doing? I one of the strangest, speaking of FP Journe, now that Mark is here, FP Journe had one of the most bizarre, and I mean the most bizarre advertising campaigns I've ever seen. And this is one he had, it could have been much more than a year or so ago. And here there were still waiting lists to get all of his watches, but he comes up and he starts talking about his ill health and why it was important to get FP Journe watches while he's still alive. Otherwise, he's at the end of his rope. This is telling people, so you better buy his watches now. I don't know if that was related to the sale to uh, Chanel or not, but it was some of these things. That's another thing to look for, is that where you have somebody buying this or buying that. That's why it's important to know that Chanel, not only they buy into FP Journe, but they bought into MB&F, as well as they bought Bell and Ross. They have another company that they bought back in the 90s that is sort of like a movement manufacturing company. They bought a part of Gautier as well. Now, looking at the trends, that'll tell you what's happening, in the past and happening now. What we want to do is take now and look into the future and say, okay, what are the signs that we can find? If you interview someone, that's they'll tell you what they want you to hear, not what necessarily they're up to. And so I think these things are sort of make collection more fun, even though I'm in no position right now to buy any more watches because I already have my bills all lined up for ones that I already want. It's still, I think, important to discover what we can about some cool watches, like Mont Blanc with Lamania movements, or Minerva movements too. Did doesn't Abdul didn't Swatch and ETA, didn't that sort of gobble up Lamania? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Wasn't Kinesi, Tudor, etc., doing a joint technology with Breitling? Yeah, I think they still are. I think Chanel owns about a quarter, I think, or so. I'm not sure how much of Chanel owns enough so that they have a steady stream of their the movements for their J12. But I think Breitling may be another one in that. Um, you know, is one of the things that's really interesting is the perception of a watchmaker that can change drastically at some point in time, that may be due either to something new that the watchmaker, or I should say movement maker, is doing, or because of simply they don't really have a very good understanding of what is actually happening, or the kinds of or what's involved. Um, La Joux-Perret is one that some people talk about. La Joux-Perret like they're sort of the same level as Vaucheur or something like that. They may be by now, but I don't know that to be the case. Um, there's traditionally what they have done is taking iboshes. Well, goes way back to when it was Jacques-SA, and they took iboshes and then they made movements from those iboshes, primarily ETA. Now, I'm not sure what they're doing now exactly. I'm not even sure who owns them. I think the Citizen own La Jupe Pierre Pereire. Trying to think who owns him. I'm not certain, but it's like trying to find things out like that. Now, sometimes if they're bought by a big company, that means they have an influx of money and maybe they want to open up some new things and do some new things like that. Those are the things that are, that'll keep us ahead of the curve, so to speak. Okay, John. Now, what do you mean the big consortiums are playing big ball with technologies? I don't. Yeah, there's something. I guess there's technologies and there are technologies. All right. Um, some technologies require some craftsmanship and they're not really that subject to mass production. That at one time it was tourbillons, but now you look at tourbillons and tourbillons their prices are way down, giving rise to the sense that, well, first of all, there's craftsmanship and there's craftsmanship in the sense that somebody figured out a way how to run them off on what amounts to a 3D printer, and suddenly you have all of them. I don't know these things though, but those things I think are, if you're looking for something that tick, this is why it was very quietly done in 2009 when Patek Philippe adopted um, silicon hairsprings, and then uh, some other companies did it. They made more noise about it, primarily Swatch, and then slowly, even more slowly, Rolex has been introducing them into their watches. I think they first did it with a woman's watch, and then they had that 1901 or whatever it was, a really great looking watch they did, but they put for my opinion only. The small watchmakers are working hard to innovate in a movement technologies. Yeah, John, they're the people I think it's very hard for them. This is why when money from like Chanel comes along, my God, what they can do with that. I mean, look at Romain Gauthier. He had sort of developed some kind of production process for making all of the parts. I mean, most, even your most, well, I guess you'd call them elite watchmakers. They got somebody else making most of the parts for them to their specs and so forth. But still, but I think that Gauthier says, well, we're going to set up a thing here and we're going to make this wheel and that wheel and that and that and that and so forth. And that's one of the reasons that Chanel bought into them. This is why I'm, and I will probably be wrong, because, but that's why I think Bell and Ross is an important to keep an eye on. What they have, you take a look at the Bell and Ross prices. you got Bell and Ross prices at certain level that are just, I guess, addressing the standard or the traditional Bell and Ross buyer. And then all of a sudden you got something up here. And I think in a way, it becomes sort of the testing that Chanel has spent a lot on developing high-end high horology. They own a hunk of Canesi, and just Canesi, though, to them is sort of like, well, they'll make a nice looking movement. These are for their inexpensive watches, the J12 line, but then their high horology stuff. And the interesting thing is, the majority of the high horology things have been for women's watches. Take a look at the movements that they came out after the Chanel #1, the one that I got in the Monsieur Chanel. So they got this #1. Then they went wild with the names and named them #2, 3, 4, and 5. Well, that's helpful because I think take a look at the ones in some of the other ones they developed. They are women's watches, but my God, the development of the movements are really something. Now, somebody may figure, well, the women like their Apple watches, so why don't we go back to guys? They're bigger suckers for this kind of stuff anyway. And what I would love to see is something by Chanel that was more down to earth price wise. Let's say under 10,000 with one of these other movements that they have, and you just take a look at them, and that to me is something possibly is going on with that. I don't know what, but be interesting to find out. Yeah, Citizen owns La Joux. Thanks, HP. They make the caliber 0200 on their expensive watches. Thank you. Yeah, the Rancher. Hey, Rancher, how you doing, man? Good to see you. The reports of your demise are premature as usual. We heard that somebody's husband caught you. Sorry about that. Craftsmanship manufacturing, two different price categories. No kidding. That's really true. If and here's something else, Abdul. I'm glad you brought that up because you have craftsmanship, and like in working with Larique, we know is that there's different parts that are made and that they work on at different levels of craftsmanship, and then Agenor has their own craftsmanship they add to it, and none of it looks like it's the kind of thing that is going to be subject to mass production that I can see. But let's say that some other company wants to make sort of a certain amount of production. I see this with some of the companies that Voet and Lannon has bought. Is that they want to have their dials, or they want to have their cases as soon as Carrie says, okay, drop everything else and let's do ours, and then you can go back to theirs when you have time for it. By the same token, this might be true with movements as well. And I don't know. This is why I think it's fun and interesting for us to look at not just sort of the bigger pictures and see where the grains of sand are. Abdul, you get your neighbor's treatment. Yeah, this is why Switzerland, I think, is important. Hey, Ellie. Euro. At least 10. Boy, I tell you, HRM, good. Japanese auctions have been a great source of unique watches for me. Bought a Longines pocket watch with blue jewels from there. For some reason, it seems recently, now maybe I'm wrong, there have been a lot of Swiss watches being sold that are available from Japan right now. I don't know, and they're at very good prices too. I don't know why or what has caused that, but it would be interesting to find out. Oh man, Abdul, you're getting Ali, I don't know. It depends on what social media that we look at. Some social media I think is really very helpful. Um, Others of it, you don't know. This is the problem. There's no standard bearer, okay, other than Abdul. Me and Abdul will be the standard bearers, but you don't have. Yeah, I mean, if somebody says something, sometimes they say it loud, not because they're right, but because they figure more people will listen to them. And I don't know, social media is a funny thing. I think it's sort of like the gold rush, in some respects. Some guy in California when in the 49ers in 1849, he discovered gold at Sutter's Mill, and in a very quick amount of time, it sort of shot out. And I think that certain discoveries that we make, if you have big loudmouths like me, to who can't keep it quiet too long, or at least until they got their copy of it. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, what is uh, social media has so much. I mean, it's like looking at a sparkler. I mean, how much of that works? I mean, how much of all of the sparks are worth anything, and how much of it is just sparkles? Yeah, HRM. I agree with that. I don't know. La Jus Pereire is. I just don't know about them. I almost wish that a lot of the technology that Citizen has available for them would somehow come to them, and maybe they could. And again, I don't know the kind of people that are working there. It's sort of like Concepto. Concepto is another mystery one. You see, who was it? When I was in Geneva, I was talking to Jean-Marc Viderec about some company had done something for this other for another watchmaker. He said, "Oh, that was a Concepto did that." I said, "Concepto." I was very surprised because usually I identify Concepto with more of like sort of a low medium movement maker. But maybe I'm wrong because Valjean Jacquet, who's the CEO of it, certainly has connections. I'll put it that way in the business. But and he's had a rough road to hoe. I also will admit that. But you wonder is that why would they do it, and what's going on with that? Those things are interesting. John, that's a good point. Yeah, you've got the scandals. Um, I think Rolex has pretty well weathered the, Chinese-made, parts or Japanese or whoever made them. How in the world, though, are you gonna make 1.5 million watches a year or whatever their numbers are and keep the prices anywhere near what they are? Of course, they keep going up, so that's hard to know too. The 49ers were followed by the 69ers who went to San Francisco. God. Hey, well, we've missed a rancher. God. Oh, all right, Euro. See what you've done, rancher. You got 911 Euro going now, and you too, and Forbin also. Oh God. All right. Anyway, guys, it's July. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, guys, thank you all for coming. Rancher, thank you for the timekeeping. I will now be able to duck the frying pan, rolling pin, and any other kitchen weapon that may be available. Have a great time, a great rest of the weekend, and thank you all for coming. Take care.